Well, good morning, and thanks everybody for joining Currituck Live, Currituck Extension Live. Excuse me. Today we're going to be discussing creating environmentally friendly landscapes. And if you would just please subscribe to our channel and click the bell for future notifications, and that'll notify you if we have any. It'll give you a video alert, and it'll notify you of any of our live events that happen in the future. So click that, and that'll help you to remind you that we're having the classes. Next, if you would, just if you have any questions during the video, just type the questions in the chat, and I will get to them. If I don't get to them during the video, then I will answer those questions at the end of the video. And if you're watching this recorded, you can find all of our information in the description below, and you can go there and then find my email address and phone number and all my contact information that you need. So we're going to go ahead and get started on this program and with this presentation. And the first thing we're going to discuss in this presentation, first of all, I'd like to say that this presentation is going to be very general, because this topic is extremely broad. So this is going to give you basically an overview and some 6 general steps into how to get started in a landscape design process, and in a way that's not going to hurt the environment, which in this area is very important. We have a lot of waterways and a lot of new building going in, and there's a lot of problems that arise from that. And the Chesapeake Bay is a good example of what can happen if these problems aren't addressed ahead of time. So the role of home landscapes. One reason is you might want to beautify your home and increase the property value. They say that a really well-maintained landscape can increase your property value about 10%, and that's pretty significant in the end result. And not to mention, you get the added benefit of enjoying this. Over the years, you get to enjoy this beautiful landscape and get outside. I know that I find myself outside more than I find myself inside, but that's just me. I enjoy working in the yard, and it's relaxing for me. Next, you're going to want to create spaces for outdoor living and recreation. This is a big one also for me. If you have nieces and nephews or kids and grandkids, and you want to try to, or even animals, you want to try to create spaces for them that are safe and just really that may be easy for you to get to or easy for you to watch the kids as they play. So all these are things you want to take into consideration when you're doing a landscape design. And create functional areas. That kind of ties in with what I was talking about before, but you want to create it, you want to make it very functional for everybody. So, you want to make your entrances and everything as functional as possible. For example, parking. If you have a compost pile, certainly if you plan it out ahead of time, you can have your compost pile where it's not, noticeable to the public. Most people don't want to put a compost pile in their front yard near the entrance to their front doorway. And you also want to consider pets and a safe place for them to play. If you live near a big roadway or highway, you're going to have problems with pets escaping and possibly getting hit by cars. And also, you can use landscaping to direct traffic. In other words, and I use the example in my container garden presentation that, for instance, if you have a step that's not really noticeable, you could put 2 containers next to that step, maybe with some plants in them, and that you'll be surprised how much that draws your attention to that step, and without having to put something that's kind of unsightly to draw people's attention to it, or to your front door. So you would want to direct that traffic or people's line of sight toward the front door. And as I said before, just to enrich your life. I find I get up at sunrise every day, or actually before sunrise, and I'm outside when the sun rises every single day, just enjoying life pretty much. So I just find the yard is just my place to relax. So next, I want to get into first a little bit of the negative environmental impacts of home landscapes. And like I said before, this is very important. That we address this before we have the problems to try to minimize the future impacts, especially in this area with all the waterways that we have. So one of the problems we have when we landscape is we displace a lot of the native plants and wildlife. You'll see this happens quite a bit. They'll clear an area, and then all of a sudden, you'll be driving down the road and you see an influx of animals being hit by cars, and that's simply because they're just being run out of their place, their habitat. So the solution would be to incorporate wildlife habitat areas, or maybe areas that you leave native, or leave a stand of trees instead of just clearing the whole lot and putting your house there. That's something that you want to consider. And also if you use native plants, those are the host plants for a lot of our beneficial, not only wildlife, but beneficial insects that we need to help tackle some of the pest problems that we have in this area. Another problem is increased water consumption that we have, because people are going to irrigate their lawns, and of course people's commodes and washing machines and all that stuff is increased water consumption, and with that becomes increased water waste. And so one of the ways we're going to we'll get into how to address that. One of them is with a rain garden. In other words, it's almost like a smaller scale of what you see when they're building these big commercial buildings or properties. You'll see retention ponds being built now, and this is something that we've learned over the years, and it filters the water. So those rain gardens or those retention ponds are there so that when the runoff happens from the parking lots and the hardscapes, then it goes into that retention pond, which slowly over time filters out that water. And you'll get pollution from pesticides and fertilizer, and even car exhaust on the road can leave pollution that runs off into our waterways. So next thing you want to do is when you first get started looking at your landscape is ask yourself 5 basic questions. What do you want? And if you're married, you definitely want to ask what your wife wants, and you want to consider what your kids and what your animals would want if you have animals. And the second thing is, what do you need? Because this can get very costly, and you want to break it down into what your needs are and what your wants are, and then you can start, taking away from what your wants are. Your needs, you're going to need all of those. So your wants are kind of what you're going to have to chisel away from once you get this all laid out. And then you want to ask yourself, what do I have? So what is existing here? What kind of features in this yard are existing that I can use in my land, whether it's a hill, whether you have a stand of trees that you want to leave, maybe a natural native barrier that you can leave. Which I highly recommend. If you're doing a barrier, you incorporate natives and ornamentals together. And then what is your style? And there are several different styles. A lot of people in this area want tropical plants or a tropical theme. Some people, they like the English cottage theme where it's kind of different, all different kinds of flowers and shrubs. Or some people like a formal kind of English garden style where, you have very formalized topiary shrubs and everything's sheared to a certain height. But whatever your style is, or another one, it's more me, is I'm more of an eclectic gardener. In other words, I'll have different beds of all different types. I'll have a tropical bed, and I might have one that's an English garden, or I may even incorporate several styles into one. It just really depends. You can make that work, but but typically most people are going to want at least a theme. And I also recommend doing this with each individual bed. So once you start this plan and you go to the nursery, don't think about the entire landscape at one time when you go to the nursery. Just think about one bed at a time and pick those plants for that bed. It will make things a whole lot easier in the long run. If you try to think about the whole project, you're going to get extremely overwhelmed. And I'm talking within an hour, you'll be overwhelmed and you won't be able to think anymore about the project. And really your thoughts will not be very cohesive. In other words, you'll be jumping all around, and the plants that you pick are not going to be what you had in mind to start with. So break it down. That's very important. And then the environment. So if you live near an open body of water, you might want to consider putting in a rain garden to prevent that water from going straight into the sound. I know a lot of the older homes in the county are built on the sound or right near the sound, and that pretty much all the runoff from those streets and the ditches run straight into the sound. Thankfully, those, we've got some things that are changing to change those kinds of processes. So next we'll get into the design process and the things that you're going to do to really start putting this down on paper and getting things together at this point. So you're done with the thinking process and now you're actually putting it down on paper. So the first thing you want to do is get a plot plan. You want to conduct a site analysis, assess your family needs, and that includes animals, grandkids, nieces, nephews, things like that. Locate your use areas, develop your use areas, and then design, construct, and plant the landscape. And it is a lot, and it's a lot to think about. So really take your time when you do this. And one other thing that I would like to recommend, and I recommend this to everybody, is wait a year, especially if you have an established landscape. If you bought a house that's already been lived in and it's established, give yourself an entire year before you start really, even in the spring, before you really start doing any landscaping, so you can see all the different perennials and things like that are in the ground that you may not be able to see in that particular season. So just give it a year, and don't go first thing in the spring and spray Roundup everywhere, because you may have a perennial bed and you've just killed all the little baby seedling perennials that are coming up. So step one, what do I have? And a lot of you, if you can, if you're looking at this, you can see that this is very common in the new homes in this county, especially in the coastal plain with the sand. It's going to be, it's going to take you several years to get this established, and with a lawn or with plants, because you're going to have to add organic material, and it's going to take several years for those plants to get established in the sand. So the first thing is, what do I have? So you develop a plot plan. And in this plot plan, you want to lay out all of your property lines, your boundaries, your setbacks, and give yourself a north arrow so you know which way is north. It's going to be very important when it comes to selecting plants and figuring out which way the sun angle is, which is also extremely important when selecting plants. And then develop, put on there where your windows and doors are in your structure, so that you know what you're looking at through those windows or through those doors. And that you can, that way you can know how to design. You have to keep all this in your mind when you're thinking this through. Next, you want to think about where your septic, utility meters, and drain pipes are. That's something that you have to take into consideration. And you may have to, before you do any digging, just call 811 and they will come out and mark all of those utilities for you. The other thing you want to do is take area measurements of specific areas that you're going to landscape. Note on your plot plan your existing vegetation and your existing hardscapes, including your house. And like I said before, like we said, the windows and doors, so you know where the entrances are. So all this is step one, and all this goes onto your plot plan. So step two, we're going to talk about what do I have? So what is already existing at the site, and you're going to conduct a site analysis. And this site analysis is you're going to mark on there, just as the examples show here, where the sun and the shade is, where you get the most wind, which is extremely applicable in this area. The sight and sounds. For instance, if you live near the highway and you want to kind of block off the highway, the view to the highway, and then obviously the sounds from the highway, because if you're outside trying to relax and you have tractor trailers and gear brakes going by, it's going to be very distracting to you if you're trying to relax. And very important, soil type. So one of the first things you want to do is go ahead and get a soil sample taken and bring it up here, and we'll get that sent in, and you get that back, and that's going to help you to know what to amend the soil with. And again, you're going to put on there the existing vegetation and the utilities also that you're going to want to put on the site analysis. All right, so in step three, these are going to be the things that you want. So what do I want in the yard? And you can see here the kids playing with the dog, or you have a playground area that you want to put in. All these things have to be taken into consideration when you're designing a landscape. So your access, your family needs, your driveway or your parking turnaround, and then the runoff that comes from that. You're going to have to figure out where that runoff is going to go, or how to best deal with that runoff, because with hardscapes, you might be creating a flood problem or some other problems, and you really want to pay attention to how much hardscape you have, and maybe even consider a permeable hardscape, which is much better for the environment. It reduces runoff, and it also allows the rainwater to get to more of the plant roots. So that's another important part of keeping our waterways clean, is using permeable hardscapes. You also want to consider, like I said, the spaces for children or space for pets. Storage for equipment. You wouldn't want your storage for equipment by your compost pile by your front door. You're going to want to put that also somewhere where it's kind of out of the way, yet also convenient, because if it's too far away, you're not going to want to go there, and you're going to end up putting your tools close by anyway and leaving them outside. So make sure that the storage for your equipment is close by. Another thing to consider is privacy. This is a big thing. A lot of people want privacy, and especially in the newer neighborhoods that I've seen go up in the county, they're very close. So you really don't have a lot of privacy in a lot of these new neighborhoods. And lastly, you want to consider your windbreaks and shade. So windbreaks, really, all that is exactly what it sounds like. It is a break from the wind. So I live on the water on the Sound, and typically the strongest winds I have come from the Northeast. So I always take that into consideration when I'm planting anything, including the vegetable garden. So if a vegetable garden is one of the things that you want, you definitely want to keep that away from the winds. Especially, you can get salt spray in these winds, and vegetables just don't take very well to winds. They tend to break up, and you get a lot of problems from that. Also consider shade. So if really hot days, you want, maybe where the kids play, you want a shady area. Or maybe that you want to shade the house out. This can actually reduce your utility cost by 50%, or your electric heating cost by 50%, which is extremely significant. So step 4, you're going to want to locate your use areas, and you can see here that and really, guys, it doesn't have to be a huge formal landscape drawing. These bubble charts work just as good as anything else. And it's very simple. You're just drawing about where the areas are. It's not anything that you're going to, you're not going to do any drafting off of these sketches or anything. So it's not very important that they're extremely accurate at this point. So locate your use areas, the public space, where the public's going to see. Again, with the compost pile by the front door, you want to keep that in mind. So where the public sees, and then the front yard, of course, that's where the public sees. And then the private spaces for personal use, or for a backyard that you just want to hang out and maybe entertain in. And then for service, where are people going to park and service the area? Where are you going to do that kind of thing? So next, step 5, again, into what do you want? Develop these used areas. So public and entrance areas, family activity areas, and utility or service areas. And then you go with your wants, and you put your wants into each individual category. So your vegetable garden, of course, is going to go in your family activity area. Your pool and your hot tub will probably go in the same. So, really, you're just kind of breaking things down and putting them into different areas, and you're still getting the ideas on paper. So look back at your needs and wants. So some of the needs that you may have is additional parking. Of course, we do entertaining, a play area, a privacy screen, and shading from the west. And then you look at your wants, and the examples here are vegetable garden, greenhouse, butterfly garden, and where does each best fit? Public or private area, or existing conditions. And you may already have, shading from the west, and that's an existing condition. That's a benefit, and you don't have to tackle that problem or address that problem in any way. Or you may have a stand of woods that's a really good play area, or a shady area for the kids to play. All right, and step 6 is going to be design, construct, and plant. And this is really the fun part about it. You've already got all your thoughts and kind of jotted everything down on paper and gotten ideas from you and your significant other. And now comes a time where you're going to have to put in some work. Even if you're not doing the physical part of it, it's going to be quite a bit of work and headache just getting it all finished and dealing with the mess and the contractors and things like that. So we'll talk about a few things to consider. Hardscape features, I think we went into that quite a bit. You could consider permeable hardscapes, which helps quite a bit with runoff. Your patios and your decks, you're going to want to consider where those are going to go, and you know how that's going to play out with your landscape design. Your walkways, are they going to be convenient? Are people going to use them? Sometimes you see walkways that people just don't use, and they end up walking through a flower bed, or they end up walking through somewhere you don't want them to, across your lawn. If you're really picky about your lawn, you might want to reconsider where your walkways go. And with walkways also, you can do a little test. We did this in school. Was you can leave it bare for a while and just see where people walk, see where the traffic pattern is. People walk the natural way they would walk, and then plan your walkways accordingly. And driveways and parking is another consideration. If you're going to be entertaining, obviously you're going to need more of a hardscape or more of a parking area for people. And outbuildings, we talked a little bit about that with sheds, a pool. If you've got a pool, you might have a pool house that you have to consider where to put. Fences, trellises, pergolas. These are things that all this has to be, considered when you're thinking about, how. So, in other words, a fence. If you needed to fence off an area for the privacy, all that needs to be taken into consideration here. And then your softscape features are going to be your plants. That's going to be everything. Your plants are what's going to soften up all these hardscapes. If you've ever looked at a house and it's pretty much concrete and brick and it doesn't have any plants in front of it, it really does look like a really hard, harsh environment, like sterile kind of. That's the way I describe it. Another thing is high versus low maintenance. Obviously, you can see that the picture on the left is extremely high maintenance. I can't even imagine trying to keep up with that. This is a topiary garden, and that's definitely a lot of maintenance. The other one is a natural area. It looks really good. It's almost nature's way of landscape designing. You really don't have to do much with it. If it were me, I would put a few azaleas or things like that for color down in the woods, or maybe just leave it the way it is. And then what is your style? We touched a tiny bit on it earlier, but as you can see, these are different styles. There's lots of different kinds of ways you can landscape design. And of course, like we talked about, you can do eclectic landscaping. You can do kind of merge the three together. Maybe if you have a fountain that's kind of a formal looking fountain, you may want to do some maybe like an English garden style just around that fountain. And then you can get, a little more wild and bushy around the outside of that, or you're more of your country cottage. Or like I said, you could do different beds. You could do a Japanese garden in one bed. You could do, a country cottage garden in another, and have it separated like that. And then the environment. And like I said before, that's really important in this area, and really in any area. But water conservation is a big one. Water quality and stormwater runoff. I think we've talked quite a bit about that. And wildlife habitat. So you always want to consider that, the wildlife is going to need a place also. And that's extremely important in any landscape is wildlife. Without wildlife, a landscape is it seems dead. So, and that get, the rabbits, the birds, everything. It's a very important part of the landscape. And landscape design, very, very important. Fertilizer and pesticide use. And of course, you want to minimize that, and having a natural area will certainly help you minimize the pesticide and the fertilizer use, really. So that's very important. And you have to take those things into consideration when you're looking at the environment and creating a landscape design. So with water conservation, what's really going to help in the long run is grouping plants by their water needs. For instance, if you have a bed that's a tropical bed, you may have to separate that from a bed that's got succulents and desert plants in it, or cacti. So you would separate those by high water use. And if it's got high water use, consider putting it close by the house, because it's going to be a lot easier in the long run for maintenance as far as water goes. And moderate water use, or even water, or the drought tolerant plants, you want to put them as far from the house as you can. That's going to, that way you're not dragging a hose. If you have no irrigation, you'll be dragging a hose a long way to water these plants. And in the heat of the summer, if you have a drought, that can be extremely, not only time consuming, but labor intensive as well. If you have an irrigation system, it's a little bit different. But again, if you irrigate your entire yard, you're really putting a hurting on the water, and causing a lot of runoff that's unnecessary. If it's designed appropriately, you will not need irrigation over your entire yard. So high water use zone, or an oasis zone. Small, high visibility areas of the landscape is where plants are provided for optimum water requirement. So really annuals and containers, vegetables, of course, are going to require daily watering, and the lawn. And if you minimize those areas, or you contain those areas within a small, you put those areas together where you have your annuals, containers, and your lawn pretty close by, you can irrigate those areas pretty easily. Without a lot of work and a lot of water waste. So moderate water use zone, or your transition zone, plants are watered during establishment, and then once established, they are watered only when they show signs of water stress. And really, once they're established, you're not going to have a huge problem with this, with the exception of, we do have a lot of sandy soils. If you live and you've got sandy loam, you're going to have to water it, twice as often, not twice as much at one time, because it's going to leach through. So you can put all the water on it you can, but it's only going to take but so much. So you want to water those plants more frequently in sandy soil. Trees, shrubs, and some perennials fall into this category. Some perennials require quite a bit of water. So that leads me to just know your plant. When you're designing landscape plants, always, when you're looking at the plants, look up the plants and what the specific needs of those plants are. That's going to help you out in the long run, financially, and with the amount of work that you have to do. So a low water use zone. Once established, plants are provided no supplemental irrigation except during periods of extreme drought. And this goes for succulents, cacti, and things like that. We discussed a little bit of that earlier. Muley grass, crepe myrtle, and Yoke Pond holly are also great examples of this. So the goal is 10% of your landscape is irrigated regularly, and 30% of the air is irrigated on demand, whether that's dragging a garden hose or simply turning a different zone on that you don't normally use in your landscape. And then 60% of your landscape is not irrigated. And again, this is just a goal. If it's 70% of is not irrigated, or 50%, it's close. It's just, this is a guideline that you want to go by. Use turf grass for a purpose. You don't necessarily have to have a big stand of it to get the same effect. On the right hand side, you can see that you're going to be putting a lot of irrigation on it, and it's on a hill, so you're going to have a considerable amount of runoff on that. And it should complement the design. Like I said, don't fill the whole space like the house on the right shows. It's much better on the house on the left than the house on the right. Yeah, it's nice and green, but it's a whole different look than the house on the left. And it's a whole lot less work in irrigation. And then a recreational surface. So where your dogs are playing, or where your kids are going to be playing, that's where you're going to want to have grass or a nice lawn. And then for erosion control, I know this plays a big part here along my, I have a bulkhead along the sound, and where there's no grass, as soon as we have a storm, the water, the sand washes away from behind the bulkhead. Where there's grass, it simply doesn't wash away. And then we have stormwater runoff. So this really affects water quality, and these are the things that retention ponds and rain gardens and things like that are trying to prevent. And you can see that algae is a big problem. And most of this comes from runoff of hard surfaces. It picks up fertilizer and pesticides, which can cause algae blooms. It picks up oil and debris off the roads, and sediment is a big problem, as you can see in the top picture. But the number one threat to water quality in urban areas. So, let's see, we'll talk a little bit about rain gardens, and I'll make this brief because we're running out of time here. I'm going a little over. I apologize for that. Rain gardens it's basically a shallow depression. It could be a low area that you already have existing in your yard. And you can always review this graphic here for information. But you can there's plenty of different links on NC State or different publications that you can access that will go into detail about how to create these water gardens. But all they're doing is the same thing as a retention pond. It's filtering that water, all the runoff. And this is just a picture, an example of a rain garden. They can be really beautiful gardens, really well done. Another way is to reduce runoff. We talked about the permeable landscaping, and rain barrels are also a great way to capture the water that runs off of your roofs. And it saves you in water costs. And rainwater is far better for plants than any kind of irrigation. It's full of minerals and the nitrogen that it gets from the air. So the wildlife includes spaces and plants for wildlife, birds, insects, frogs, lizards, and more. Native plants are better food sources for the native wildlife because that's what they're used to eating. Provide shelter, so evergreens, clusters of trees and shrubs, and a water source. You want ponds or a water garden, preferably. So we'll go into a little bit about conserving energy. We talked a little bit about south and west exposure, and having a little shade on your house can drastically reduce your energy costs. We talked about windbreaks. You could use an evergreen hedge as a good example for a windbreak. It also gives you shelter from cold winds. It provides shade. A deciduous tree works really well to shade out from south and west exposure. And like we said, it can cut the energy cost by 50%. And that's all I've got for today. I apologize for running a little bit over. That's it for live from Currituck Extension today. I will answer any questions if you have now on the screen. I don't see any. And if you don't have any questions, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click the bell for future notifications. And check the description below for links to our social media sites. And the evaluations, we really look at these guys. They're important. We would appreciate your feedback. It really helps us to line up the classes in the future. Also, I would like to say, if you like some of the classes here and you want to learn more about gardening, and especially if you like volunteering and giving back to the community, please consider joining the Master Gardener program. And for more information on that, you can call me or email me at any time. The next class is going to be Sheila, and she will be giving a class on creating pizza crust using no yeast. So stay tuned for that class at Wednesday at 11:30. Thank you and have a great day.